This is the Business of Apps podcast, bringing you actionable insights from the leaders of the global app industry and the world's fastest growing apps. You can find more app news, data and analysis over at businessofapps.com.
Welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. On this show, we invite app industry professionals to cover various topics. We promise to do our best to keep it both insightful but brief. On this episode, we have Thomas Yannopoulos, Director of Sales at Remerge. Thomas, welcome to the Business of Apps podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, thank you for coming. All right, so if you ever had a chance to talk to an app marketer at a conference, well, back in the day when it was possible to do in person, one of the things that kept her or him up at night was, and still is, how to engage their users and keep them engaged, how to make them stay and keep using their apps. So app retention and engagement questions are important for any app, but it's especially true for e-commerce. And Thomas will walk us through why that's the case. But let's talk about you, Thomas, first, as we'll do on this show. Tell us about yourself and how did you get into mobile marketing business?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working in performance app marketing for about 8 years now, which is a long time in this industry. So I started in around 2012, 2013.
That's
working
true.
for a company called, I was working for a company called JumpTap. JumpTap was one of the first DSPs to enter the industry. I've been working in sales my whole career, and there I was working in sales and as a very junior seller. I was also working with the teams who were optimizing campaigns, learning how programmatic bidders function, learning how bid optimization works, et cetera. It was really a wonderful learning experience for me at JumpTap. Ultimately, we were acquired by our competitor called Millennial Media. Ultimately, Millennial Media was then acquired by AOL, who had already been acquired by Verizon. So my first stint in the mobile marketing industry was in some ways an interesting microcosm of what generally happens in this industry, which is, small companies get bought by larger companies over time. But it was a wonderful experience. I learned a great deal there. From there, I ultimately went over to a company called Fixu, who I worked with for a short period of time, doing much of the same, selling app advertising campaigns to performance app marketers. And then after Fixu, I came across Remerge at a conference that I was speaking at. I saw some people from Remerge with shirts on. And I said, I have no idea what that is. I've never heard of it. Mm-hmm. And I decided to reach out to a buddy of mine who actually had just recently joined them. Lo and behold, 3 years ago or so, I reached out for an interview. They got back to me. We set up an interview. I joined the team, and it's been absolutely wonderful. I always wanted to work for a company whose product and vision I believe in, and Remerge serves beautifully in both those regards.
Cool. That's pretty packed 8 years, I should say. Let's talk about Remerge now. What do you guys do? And is there any story behind the name?
It's a funny question. I actually have no idea. It's something I should have asked a long time ago. My guess is emerge, right, is a verb, which means to come from something, and to remerge would be to come back from something. So my guess is that's kind of the play on words, if there is a play on words there. But yeah, that's how the name was born. And yeah, it's a wonderful organization that, I think was started about 5 or 6 years ago, probably over 6 at this point. I should know these stats, but it is what it is. We're based in Berlin. We have offices around the world, offices in Singapore, China, Japan, New York, San Francisco, Berlin, et cetera. And it's been a company that has grown tremendously over the course of my tenure here, not because of me, but I have seen this company really, really increase in size over that time because there's been a genuine need for the products that we bring to market. Really cool to see.
Got it. Okay, let's for starters, let's make the case. Why do we need to retarget mobile app users? And to be honest, what exactly does this term retarget means?
Yeah, sure. So the question of why we should retarget consumers, I think, boils down to more economics than anything else, right? If I could make a use case to someone that a certain marketing activity would yield more dollars in than you have to, yield more dollars from the consumers than you have to put into it, there's not really many reasons why you wouldn't do that, right? And that's what we aim for at Remerge, right? In any case, all we want to do is get your business to a point where the revenue we're generating from your campaigns is more than you have to put into the campaigns, even if you're cohorting or analyzing it from an LTV basis, like we see with a lot of game advertisers, for example. But that's all performance marketing is to a large degree, right? It's a big math equation that everyone's trying to crack it at scale, right? You see the same thing with user acquisition. That's my biggest argument for why you should retarget, right? If it's economically, in the green for you, there's really no reason why you shouldn't do it. From a more intuitive perspective, you should retarget because you want to talk to your consumers on a consistent basis. And not all of your consumers are available to you through channels like push, channels like CRM, et cetera, right? It's important for businesses to stay engaged with their consumers because, as we know, especially in the app ecosystem, losing consumers is part of the game, right? Churn rates that we see with the average apps are through the roof. We're talking something like, 90% of your consumers will leave your app and over the course of 30 days, right? And that's a stat that we've just accepted for years and years in this industry. And I think our argument at Remerge is you actually don't have to accept that statistic, right? You don't have to accept the fact that your consumers are going to churn at an insane rate. We can create scenarios in which we're never going to eliminate churn, obviously, but we can reduce it and we can slow it down and we can give your consumers better experiences and educate them along the way in terms of how they relate to your brand. So there are so many cases for retargeting. But I'd say, it really boils down to economics and intuitively, as a business, you want to stay in touch with your consumers. Now, I forget what your second question was there. Can you remind me?
Yeah, actually, you just answered my whole question, but the whole question, I think that I was just trying to define the term retarget specifically, if there's any definition
Yeah, sure. I mean, retargeting means engaging with your consumer when they're not on your property to complete some sort of action. That's how I would define it. There's all sorts of different ways that people define it, but the crux of what it is that we do at Remerge is, again, we engage specific segments of your audience when they're on other apps with relevant ads to drive them back into your app to ultimately complete a certain task or activity or conversion event.
So you're trying to, basically this is the way to, for instance, people may be distracted, on their course to install the app or, do specific actions and the app by any, event in their life. And you're trying to reach them out again to make sure that they have not lost the interest or just out of the radar, your app, right?
Yeah, I think that's more or less accurate. The one caveat or adjustment I make there is we don't do anything related to the install itself, right? So install events are what we would put in the realm of user acquisition. Everything that we do is to drive engagement from consumers post-install. So my apologies, I should have clarified that. But yeah, any activity that occurs post-install, be it a registration, be it a level completion for a game, right? Be it a subscription, right? Be it a purchase, first-time purchase, repeat purchase, any event that's valuable to your business that is trackable in your app, we can help get your users to that point.
All right, let's get to specifics. So how do we re-engage the users when it comes to eCommerce app, and what are the methods and tools?
Yeah, it's a good question. So eCommerce presents specific challenges, but also some of the biggest opportunity when it comes to retargeting, right? Specific challenges in the sense that really in eCommerce, anyone is eligible for retargeting that has installed your app, right? And that's often the case for a lot of other apps, but it's especially the case for eCommerce. We can retarget anyone. But generally speaking, what we see most of our partners in the e-commerce space do is at a macro level, split their consumers into two groups, right? Group A is those consumers who have not made their first purchase. Group B, those who have made at least one purchase in the past. So we call it first-time purchases and previous purchasers. The reason we split it in this regard is because we expect different behavior from these groups at a macro level. And you can even slice and dice those groups into much more granular segments. But at a macro level, the creative strategy that you apply to these two audience segments can be vastly dissimilar, right? In many cases, with first-time purchases, for example, we know that promotions are what get consumers down the funnel to make that first purchase, right? $10 off your first order or 5% off your first purchase of a pair of shoes or whatever the case may be. Promotions are often a really important way to get that first time purchase. And when it comes to something like repeat purchases, What we really want to see is dynamic ad usage, right? So we want to be able to speak to consumers on a one-to-one basis that really adds to their experience with your app. And what this means is we want to set up infrastructures and systems that allow us to ingest data around what has this consumer's past behavior been in your app. And as a result of that past behavior, what do we expect their future behavior to look like? Or how can we add to their experience with your brand, right? So past behavior might be something like search history, purchase history, time in app, et cetera. All these metrics come into play when we're determining how it is we want to segment the consumers and how it is that we want to serve an ad to them. And the holy grail of really, honestly, like retargeting in general is personalization, right? And e-commerce provides tons of opportunity for personalization because we can say consumer A was looking at, this sweatshirt the other day. They didn't purchase it. They didn't add it to their cart. That probably means they might not have been actually interested in this particular sweatshirt, but let's serve them ads for suggestion for similar types of articles of clothing to try to get them down the funnel, right? That's a lot of what we try to do at Remerge, right? Engage the consumers with content that's going to add to their experience with the brand, drive more purchases for the brand, and ideally do it at scale. So you asked about the methods and tools.
Yep.
Really, as a marketer, what I ask everyone to think about is, first and foremost, answer the question, why are we retargeting these consumers, right? If you don't have a good reason for retargeting them, just don't do it at all. But if you have a good reason to retarget them, then it's a matter of saying, what is the level of granularity at which I can approach this particular consumer, right? And the ultimate level of granularity is, again, that personalization I described before. If you're unable to achieve that, it's a matter of taking other metrics and trying to fit them into a retargeting campaign, right? Those other metrics might be, what are the top 10 selling items in a particular region, right? And let's advertise those top 10 selling items to a region. There are tons of other metrics and attributes you can pull, but the idea is to, again, drive that personalization, do it at scale, then optimize the campaign accordingly.
So speaking of optimization, generally, can you think of do you see we're getting closer to this, the ultimate goal of actually having a really good grasp on what is on people's mind, without reading their minds, without telepathy, but from the standpoint having a lot of data, like somebody like Amazon would do, having tons of data to actually guess spot on what exactly could be the reason to get back to the customer, what should be next for him. In general, how good are we as an industry right now in this endeavor?
It would totally depend on the platform that you're investigating for that question, right? When you think about something like Facebook, obviously, and everyone's seen that Netflix show, I forget what it's called, the Social Dilemma, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
In any case, right?
That's right.
Yeah, right. They're taking so many data points, combining them through AI and ML, and actually being able to get at what you just described, right? Which I think presents a whole set of challenges, which have in turn led to a whole set of data privacy regulations in this industry. So I'm not going to get into that too much, but I think they are very much so close to what you just described. When you talk about someone like Remerge, right, a DSP. And any of our competitors for that fact, right? We are not there, right? We are not at that point simply because when it comes to retargeting, we're not pulling from hundreds of different apps or thousands of different apps to create these massive audience profiles, right? We're basically saying, you're an e-commerce app, tell us about the app, meaning send us events that you're capturing in the app, and then we will in turn leverage these events to engage with your consumers in meaningful ways. But the pool of data that we're pulling from is just from one app. It's not from tens of thousands of apps. So we can't really predict a consumer's behavior outside of their behavior in that single app, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I got you. Let's cover the mistakes. What kind of mistakes do you see people are doing when it comes to retargeting of an e-commerce app specifically?
I would say the mistakes that e-commerce apps make are, one of the biggest ones, which I just discussed before, was lack of personalization, right? When I discussed before, hey, there's a holy grail, and that's, reaching out to your consumers on a one-on-one basis. Not all apps are capable of achieving that, but there is approximations of that they could achieve, and they're not. So one of the biggest challenges I see or mistakes I see is the use of poorly developed creatives that aren't really compelling to a consumer, right? One of the biggest mistakes I've ever seen is something like, an ad that just says, hey, here's our brand. It has a picture of a shirt and it says, open the app now. It's just not a good experience for any consumer, which brings me to a second point. I'm actually going to have a third at the end of this, but the second point is one of the biggest mistakes I see is a lack of focus on what is the actual consumer experience with this app, meaning deep linking, right? When we serve a specific ad or product to a consumer, we want that experience for the consumer to be seamless, which means the advertiser needs to have deep linking enabled in the app to take that consumer from ad to product ideally, right? Or at least ad into app. The challenge I see in many cases with apps across the board is they haven't invested in the infrastructures associated with deep linking, which means the consumer experience after they engage with the ad is very poor, right? And it's not really catered to what it is they want to ultimately achieve. I'd say the third mistake I see with e-commerce apps and really honestly apps across the board is the challenge of how do we measure efficacy of our programs, right? How do we measure whether or not there's success in a particular campaign? Historically, we measure campaigns based off last touch, last click, last view-based attribution models, which are essentially come to us from channels like Facebook who kind of made their own rules in that regard. I think every app should be looking into incrementality, right? Incrementality allows you to determine what would my life have looked like were it not for this particular vendor, right? It's an incrementality test is one in which we set up a control group that doesn't get ads versus a target group that does get ads. And it provides just a much greater level of empirical certainty as to whether or not a particular partner is effective for you, right? So I think every e-commerce app, I think every app basically that is advertising actively should be investigating incrementality. It should be an important part of how they go about determining which partners they should work with to serve ads, which partners they should not work with. It should also be an important component for them in developing what their KPIs should look like. I hope that answers your question. Those are just some of the mistakes.
Totally. Long-term thinking when it comes to incrementality, this is how you can actually grow your business over the long period of time. Okay, so let's give people an example of probably well-known, if it's possible, retargeted campaign. Can you think of any, perhaps for an e-commerce app?
Yeah. I mean, again, e-commerce apps are so beautifully built for retargeting because generally speaking, e-commerce apps have large product catalogs, which allow them in turn to engage their consumers with meaningful product ads that are actually going to influence their behavior and also improve their experience with the app, right? So the best known case for this is a very simple use case for retargeting an e-commerce app, right? I'll actually give you two. The first one is what I described before, first-time buyers, right? If someone installs your app and doesn't make a purchase within the first few days of an e-commerce app, the likelihood they're ever going to purchase goes down dramatically. The likelihood they're ever going to purchase is almost zero at that point, right? If they don't start taking those actions right away, right? So as an e-commerce app, you have to answer the question, if someone installs my app and we are 2 days post-install, for example, they still haven't made a purchase, what is it I can say to this consumer that's going to get them through that funnel, right? And in many cases, it comes down to education, right? It comes down to you as a brand educating on them on what is the breadth of your catalog, right? Or what are the deals and promotions you have going on for first-time buyers? Those are the kinds of things and tactics that really get those consumers over that hurdle of the first-time purchase. Once you get them past that first-time purchase, the likelihood that they're going to repeat purchase goes up exponentially, right? So that's a perfect use case for how you could retarget an e-commerce app. The second one, again, is with those past purchasers, and the one I've described a few times, but we'll talk more specifically. Let's say, someone made 5 purchases, over the course of 6 months, but it's been 2 months since they made their last purchase, right? You might argue that, that user is already churned, but we got to win them back, right? And in that use case, you might want to say, okay, what was their past purchase behavior? And how can we relate that past purchase behavior to the products we currently have available to get them back in the app, right? So your product catalogs are constantly evolving and changing, and it's important to keep your consumers up to date on what those catalogs look like through dynamic ads and through product suggestion engines, right? Which is something that we do quite a bit of here at Remerge. Those two tactics, when put together, along with tons and tons of others, really allow you to reduce the churn of your first-time buyers, reduce the churn of your repeat purchasers, and drive incremental revenues to your e-commerce apps.
All right, got you. Now, let's shift the gears a little bit. Let's touch the ethical side of the equation. I think it's going to be, this question will be familiar to many people who are listening to this show, which is this. On the one hand, we're consumers, right? On the other, we are in the mobile ad business. So probably you may know this feeling, it's a complicated feeling. On one side, we're not really happy about Apple's prevent cross-tracking setting in Safari or upcoming iOS 14 IDFA policy change. And on the other hand, we're consumers, and from a consumer standpoint, you may be welcoming these updates. So, what are your thoughts on this controversy?
I think from a consumer perspective and a business perspective, we're welcoming the update, right? The reality is, consumers have rights, and we are all obligated to follow those consumers' rights. We all have a vested interest in making sure that consumers feel safe with the manner in which their data is being applied to marketing initiatives and advertising initiatives. And to that end, right, I have no problem with what Apple is planning to do. I think I initially, to be totally honest, had some problems with the speed at which they initially planned on rolling out these changes, right? Mm-hmm. The reality is it was going to impact a multi-billion-dollar industry in a really big way, and they hadn't provided the industry with the time to adjust, nor the tools to actually be able to run effective programs, right? For example, SKAd Network is the tool that many companies are going to rely on in the future. The challenge is SKAd Network isn't super easy to adopt ubiquitously across the industry, right? And Apple hadn't initially planned on providing us that time. So I think the delay helps us in quite a few ways. And I think as an industry, right, SKAd Network's going to provide us a reasonably useful tool for the future. I think it is limiting in a number of capacities, but as somewhat of an intermediary between what we currently have and what we're looking for, I think it functions. I also think, and this goes back to an earlier point, the concept of incrementality is going to become even more important in the future, right? Without last touch and last view based attribution models, which again, I think I have principled objections to. I think in the future, incrementality is really going to be the methodology that we're looking for as an industry to tackle the challenges that are posed to us by the lack of a identifier for consumers. And cracking that code for how to effectively measure incrementality is going to be incredibly challenging for the industry as a whole. But I do think it is the direction that we've been heading for years, and I think we're going to continue to head in that direction. So overall, right, this change creates a whole new set of challenges and problems. This is an industry that consistently overcomes similar challenges and problems, right? This isn't the first time that changes have happened to how we go about using device IDs or the data that's available to us. So I think we're going to adapt quickly over time. I think the delay was, in some regards, a godsend. It was also just the more appropriate move from Apple. But I'm really excited to see the innovative ways in which we collectively start figuring out how we are going to attribute and target and measure. The reality is there isn't a single person or organization in this industry that doesn't have some vested interest in making sure we figure out iOS 14 and the changes to the IDFA. So I'm really excited to see how we can reach across the aisle, so to say, and work with each other to come up with valuable long-term solutions. I think it's going to be really cool. And at the end of the day, if we can find great solutions that also could protect consumer privacy, then we're in a really wonderful spot where we're providing an awesome solution to consumers.
Yeah, totally agree, Tommy. All right, now let's switch the gears again. And we're at the point of the show where I'm asking my guests this just a few quick questions to paint a broader picture of who they are. All right, question number one. Are you iOS or Android person?
iOS, but one day I'll give Android a shot, but I've been iOS for years.
All right. Do you remember, if that's possible, your first mobile phone, pre multi-touch screen, those days?
I don't. I remember I got my first phone far later than all my friends because I think my parents had some concerns about, giving teenagers phones or whatever. But it was some silver flip phone. I do remember when I got my Razr, as I'm sure everyone does, like that was a big deal to me to get a Razr phone. But I don't remember the make and model. Actually, my first phone may have been an LG flip phone, silver with no camera, if I recall correctly, something like that.
All right, back into 2020. What is your favorite app now and why?
Yeah, sure. My fiance and I have been doing a ton of work around the house, maybe because of the pandemic and everything, and we're just looking for projects to do. So with that, we've been actually buying a fair amount of furniture here and there and updating certain rooms in the home. So right now, one of my favorite apps is called All Modern. It's from the organization Wayfair, and they have a number of different apps, but it has great furniture that I really like, and it's something that I find myself checking out here and there.
All right, I think my next question may be kind of linked to this one for you specifically. Are there any new technologies are you most excited about? Like when you're looking at a smartphone sitting on your table, what kind of updates, probably both hardware and software, would you like to see on this device in the near future?
It's a really good question. When it comes to hardware, I don't know, honestly. Like, I feel like we kind of just wait for Apple to go ahead and innovate, and then we just kind of adopt, right? I mean, the reality is I feel like I have way more than I need with this phone, right? If anything, I guess the speed of browsing would be a cool thing to improve, and I think 5G should do some of that, right? But we're just so beyond privileged to have information at the disposal it is to us, and communication at the rate it is to us. I mean, we are just so incredibly privileged as a group of people to have these devices available to us. So I honestly couldn't ask for more from a hardware perspective. I don't ever find myself frustrated with the performance of my phone or my laptop. I always feel like kind of in awe of how tremendous they are, to be honest with you. So I know it's a lame answer for a technology sort of podcast, but I just couldn't really imagine too much more.
No, totally not. I wouldn't say that, because we're all people. We're on a personal level, we're all taking a different perspective on the hardware we're using. That's the essence of the question. What does it do for you personally? It may be, many things, obviously. All right. Yeah. And now, before I let you go, just one more question. How can people get in touch with you and get more information about what you do?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you just email me. My email is Tommy, Tommy, at remerge.io, remerge.io. Our website, therefore, is www.remerge.io. You definitely don't need the 3 W's at the beginning. I also run a little podcast on the side called Apptivate, Apptivate, where I talk to mobile marketers about, kind of what they're thinking, what they're seeing, and how they're approaching specific challenges and topics. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you ever want to chat retargeting or mobile performance advertising. I've been doing it for a while, so I'm always happy to chat about it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Art. It's been a pleasure, and it was great to chat with you for a bit.
My pleasure. Bye-bye. And that was Thomas Yannopoulos, Director of Sales at Remerge. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Just search for Business of Apps, and you will find us easily. We release episodes on Mondays, so subscribe and you'll be able to get new episodes on your smartphone, tablet, or computer as soon as we release them. And please don't forget to leave us a review and comment. It is highly appreciated. And all episodes will also be available on businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.
This is the Business of Apps podcast, bringing you actionable insights from the leaders of the global app industry and the world's fastest growing apps. You can find more app news, data, and analysis over at businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening to the Business of Apps podcast. For more, head on over to businessofapps.com.